so much for joining me today. You're watching In Deep on the Delta, and today I'm going to talk about a technique that I call power pitching out here. And it's a pitching technique that's beefed up for Delta standards. And I want you to understand that it's just not the technique of pitching, but it's also a strategy that I use out here. And I know most of you guys are probably using a similar strategy, but it's how you combine the pitching, the power pitching with the strategy. So I'll go over all the gear that we use, a lot of the baits that I like to use, how to set it up, the rigging and everything, and then we'll talk about why when you infuse the power pitching with the strategy, it's going to really increase your take out here. We'll start off with a rod. It's a power rod. This is not a punch rod, but it's a medium heavy to heavy rod. 7 foot to 7'4" is what I like. I am not rod specific or reel specific when it comes to brands, but you got to have a rod that has some backbone in it because you're going to be catching some big fish and you need to pull them out of some substantial cover. Not punching, but you're still going to need to pull them out of some cover. 7 to 7'4", medium heavy to heavy rod. Reel's got to have a good drag on it, and whatever reel you want or you like, put it on there, but it's got to be a high-speed reel. 7-1, 8-1 is great. And you have to remember, pitching, we are going to be pitching to targets all day long, and it is important to, once you make your cast and you work that cast and you're ready to pull it back to the boat and start your next cast, that you're able to retrieve your bait very quickly and get it back out to your next target. And that's one thing that really separates I'll say the Joes from the pros. You can't be wasting time, because as we drift down the current or with the wind in the Delta, if you're slow doing that, you're going to miss so many targets. So make sure you have a 7-1 or 8-1 reel. Set it up with 55 to 65 pound braid, and most of our baits will be tied directly onto braid. With that being said, when we get into the situation out here that the water is super clear or the fish are in very shallow water, I'm going to show you another rig that I use, and it's the braid with a leader, a 5 or 6 foot mono or floral leader, and that is for our finesse type fishing. But remember, when I'm putting a leader on there, I'm putting 18 to 20 pound test onto 55 pound braid, so it is still a substantial piece of equipment that will move heavy fish. So that basically is very simple. You've got the rods probably already on your boat. Now the way you set them up, again, very simple. It's a basic Texas rig, and a Texas rig is a bobber stop, sliding weight. This one I have a bead, and I've talked about that bead before. I like to put it on there in the spring. I just seem to get more bites, and 90% of the time with this technique I am using a inline worm hook. Now I'm not tied to this. You can use an extra wide gap hook, you can use a box hook, you can use whatever style hook that you like to use. It can't be a light wire hook. It's got to have it doesn't have to be super heavy, but it's got to be strong enough to jack some big fish out of. So when I set up my baits on this, I rig them Texas style, and they are all weedless. And with this rig, you can either rig creature baits or worms, as with all of these rigs. I'll go through 3 of the basic ones, and all 3 of these you can rig either a worm or a creature bait on. So that's the first setup. And again, this bead is optional. When I am using a bead, a lot of times I will use a brass weight, kind of the brass and glass type thing. When that bead is not in there, I generally use a tungsten weight. That's one setup. The other setup is basically the same thing. And let me back up a little bit. When I'm using my tungsten, it's usually a 1/4 to a 1/2 ounce weight. And I will generally have a 1/2 ounce, a 1/4 ounce, and no weight at all. And we'll go over that and when we get to the strategies here. So my second rig is basically kind of a light punch setup. I've got a 1/2 ounce weight with a couple bobber stops. This is what they call a punch skirt. If you're not familiar with it, it just slides onto braided line. And then I have a heavy inline hook. And on this one I've got a creature bait, and this is a kinky beaver. It all sets down there, and this is a rod or a setup that I can do some light punching and get into some pretty heavy cover. And remember, this technique will work 365 days a year, but it really excels during the time where the water temperature gets above 55 degrees through summer months, when you're dragging plastic baits along the bottom. So early in the spring, we don't have our vegetation that's really, growing. There's holes in it. It's not as dense as it usually is during midsummer. So a lot of times you can get away with a 1/2 ounce bait as you're going down the bank and doing some light punching. Now, with that being said, this is not a system or a technique that is going to replace punching. I always have a punch rod on board during the summer months. So we've got our light T-rig, heavy T-rig, and for those times when the water's clear or the fish are real finicky, I'm going to run another T-rig setup with no weight at all, and this one has 55-pound braid and about 4 to 6, maybe 8 feet of 18 to 20-pound test. I usually use mono. If it's super clear and you think that you're going to get another bite or two with fluoro, go with fluoro. No weight here. Inline. Actually, this is a box hook here, but bobber stop. I've got a little glass bead, and that bead is in front of the worm, pegged down. I have been doing real well on that lately, but the bead is optional. A lot of times I will just throw the worm. So that kind of concludes the rigging. It's pretty darn easy to get this thing all rigged up. Now, we're going to get to the baits. We've got just standard baits, and if you have a worm or a creature bait that you really like, go ahead and use them. My standard worms are like most of you. It's a 5-inch Senko, 6-inch Senko. I stick to standard colors: green pumpkin, black with blue flake, some plums, browns, anything that looks like a crawdad. Orange flake, red flake. Make it look like a crawdad and you're going to be fine. I like the Billows Gill by G-Crack. That's a good one. I use Robo Worms like everyone else. I like the 6-inch Robo Worm out here. Whatever worm you have confidence in, that's what you want to use. Well, I also like the cut tail worms. I throw a lot of punch type stuff and the standard kinky beavers. This is the D-Bomb Candy Grass. That's a baby one. I really like the Brush Hog, the Zoom Super Brush Hog. What else do I have? Oh, this is I don't use a lot of Guggen baits, but this is a good one. I like it. It's very thin and you can punch it through. It's kind of a difference between a worm and a creature bait. Works great. I also will throw things like Yamamoto Ikas and different oddball things like that. Anything that looks like a darn crawdad, they're going to take. Oh, tubes. That's something that a lot of people don't throw out here, and I do like to throw tubes. And my favorite tube is the Big Bite Baits craw tube. It's basically just a tube and it's got a couple of craw appendages on it. Green pumpkin, black with blue flake, you're going to be good to go. If you like throwing a jig, by all means, take that T-rig off and put a jig right onto straight braid and do the same thing that we're going to be talking about here in a minute. Okay, a couple little things that bait modifications. This will be really quick. Especially when you have a new worm that has a lot of salt in it, like a Yamamoto. What I will do is I'll take a piece of Velcro, or this is a hook file, and what I'll do is I'll brush it. And what that does is it pulls the salt out of it and it takes the shine off of it. I don't know if you guys know, when you pull these out, these things are super shiny. This is one that's fairly new, and you can see the shine. Once you hit that salt, it kind of dulls the, I don't know if you can tell the difference there, but it dulls it up and it pulls the salt out of it. It gives it more salt. Salt's supposedly one of the things that fish can taste. So when a fish comes up and bites it, number one, it's going to look more natural because it's not shiny. It's going to look more like a worm, and he's going to get that flavor of the salt in that first bite. I will also use a scent all the time in the summer. I like the Megabass Mega Gel scent. I think it's called Mega Gel or Mega Strike. This is a good one. If you got one that you like, make sure you're buttering these baits up because they are slow-moving baits, and the fish have a chance to come up and inspect them. The last but not least, I do like this thing called a Dip and Glow pin. It's basically a pin, and you can color the tips of tentacles or worms or tails, whatever. This one has, chartreuse and kind of a crawdad color. I have, let's see, is this one? I don't know if you can see this. This is one that's been colored up a little bit, right on the tips of these things, and they don't look like much right, out above water. But if you throw this thing underwater, boy, I'll tell you, these things really stand out. I think between putting a lot of scent on it and making some customized things, colors, you're going to get a few more bites. So with that, we've got all our baits, we got our rigging. Let's talk about the philosophy. I said that this does not replace punching. Let's just say I have my 3 power pitching rods on deck. I will also have a punching rod or a flipping rod, and I probably have a chatterbait and a topwater bait and a couple other rods, but this is primarily for our bottom bouncing type stuff. It is essential that to be a good Delta fisherman, you have to be able to spot your targets and get the proper bait to that target as quickly as you can. Now remember, we talked about having a 7 or 8 to 1 gear ratio. Your next cast starts at the end of your last cast when that bait is still in the water. When that bait's in the water and you decide it's not going to get bit, that's when your next cast starts. You should be looking down the bank and you should have your next target already in your mind, and when you're reeling in, you want that bait to come back fast to the boat and put it in there quickly. And here's where the strategy is. Remember what you have on deck. Remember that if you come up to a point and it's got a sharp drop off, you're going to be grabbing your half-ounce weight maybe and pitching it out there so you get down on that drop off and you're fishing it. Now as soon as you go by that point, you may only throw this twice. You get around that point and there's a 2-foot flat out there, and the water's clearer than it was on the point because it doesn't get as much current. You're going to drop this rod, you're going to immediately go to your weightless setup, and you're going to pitch it into that little depression or whatever you're fishing that's maybe only a foot or 2 deep and it's very clear water, and you're going to make that cast and work that cast, maybe 1 or 2 casts. Now as you get past that depression, it comes up to the next little, maybe it's a rock or a little bit of riprap or something, and you need to get down to 4 or 5 feet on an edge or in a trough. You don't need a half an ounce, but you've got this guy here with a 1/4 ounce or maybe lighter, depending on, you're always going to be adjusting weights, and that is important too. Certain days you may need, you're going to find that the half ounce is really outproducing the 1/4, and other days the weightless is going to outproduce them both. So you always have to be thinking about changing weights and even sizes of baits also, but that is a very important factor. And so as you get down and you hit the next little ledge or something, you may only need a 1/4 ounce. Now you may come up, the next thing you're going to see is a big patch of hyacinth. Perfect punch spot. You're going to drop that power pitching stuff. You're going to grab your punch rod, make 3 or 4 punch cast in there, and as you go by, you're looking at your next piece of structure and deciding what you're going to use. But as far as weight, whether it's weightless, whether it's half ounce, whether it's a creature bait, whether it's a worm. You'll have all that at your disposal. And just take that into consideration and think about that as you're going through your day fishing. And as you get better and better and more efficient at fishing the water in front of you, not just saying, hey, I've got a T-rig with a 1/4 ounce weight and I'm going down the bank and I'm going to make them eat it. Big difference between throwing that 1/4 ounce weight sometimes and no weight, or a half ounce, and it's just really you'll never understand it until you start doing it, or you fish with somebody and you go, why is this guy catching so darn many fish? He's throwing worms, but he's throwing worms on several different rigs. So just keep that in mind, and all the information that I'm relaying to you, what I want you to do is just think about it. Think about the baits that you like, think about the rods that you like and the areas that you like to fish, and tailor them to your style of fishing and the areas that you're fishing. And when you get this technique down, man, you are going to really find that your catch rates go up, and the size of fish that you catch is also going to go up. So thank you guys so much for watching. If you haven't subscribed, make sure you subscribe. Hit the like button. Hey, until the next video, we'll see you guys on the water.